Welcome to Midcast, an interview series featuring dissenting voices the establishment would rather silence. I'm your host, Manar Muhawish Adli. Lebanon is reeling in from a blast that destroyed much of the capital, Beirut, from last week on Tuesday, August 4th. 2,700 tons of ammonium nitrate in the city's port is thought to have caught fire and exploded, killing at least 157 people and injuring thousands more. The blast, believed to be one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in history, destroyed much of the city and has left an estimated 300,000 people homeless. Now, the explosion could barely have come at a worse time for Lebanon, which is suffering through an economic meltdown with a collapsing currency, rampant inflation, new unemployment difficult to come by, and food becoming increasingly scarce. Worse still, the country's economic minister, Raoul Nahmi, confirmed that grain silos at the port containing around 15,000 tons of wheat were destroyed. As a result, the country has barely a few weeks of food left in reserves. Hospitals already feeling the strain due to the worsening coronavirus outbreak have also been overwhelmed and have been forced to turn away many arriving for urgently needed medical care. With the city destroyed, roads closed, and vehicles upended, most of Beirut's residents have had little option other than to stay where they are, begin to clean up, even as clouds of toxic fumes engulf the area. While the blast occurred in a context of rapid economic decline, increasing public outrage over corruption, including from Washington itself, are squeezing the country dry. Now, joining us today are two independent journalists and analysts who lived through the blast, Laith Marouf and Marwa Osman. Laith Marouf is a journalist, geopolitical analyst, and activist who has served as Canadian National Chair of the group Solidarity for Palestinian Human Rights and was Executive Director of Concordia University Television in Montreal. He currently lives in Beirut and saw firsthand the devastation caused by the explosion just last week. Marwa is a lecturer at the Lebanese International University and Ma'arif University. She's also the host of the Mid-East stream broadcasted on Al-Itaja English channel. Her writing focuses primarily on Middle Eastern issues and can be found in a wide range of outlets, including Press TV. Like Laith, Marwa is also a resident of Beirut. Now, thank you so much for joining me today. As I touched on in the introduction, the blast is merely the latest terrible calamity to befall Lebanon in recent times. Given the pandemic and the economic crisis you are currently living through, Marwa, could you describe what has happened economically and how difficult it is for ordinary people in their daily lives?
Sure. Thank you for having us, Manar. Thank you for touching upon this very horrific incident that happened in Beirut. I would just like to correct something that my show Midi stream is actually on Press TV. I used to work at Ittijah, but no longer work there. I work at Press TV right now. I'm an independent journalist, but my show airs on Press TV. Now, concerning what is going on. Let's begin by saying that our currency depreciated 80% since less than a year now. Since the beginning of the October 17 revolution, our currency, which is pegged to the dollar, was 1,500 Lebanese lira to the dollar. Now it's up to 10,000 Lebanese lira to the dollar, which means it lost more than 80% actually of its value. We have 35% unemployment, and we have more than 50% of Lebanese either poor or under the poverty line. And these are all official numbers coming from both the Lebanese institutions, governmental institutions, and also the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank as well, because they're really following the economic situation in Lebanon due to issues that we will touch upon later during the show, hopefully. We have 89.7% inflation rate. That's our inflation rate right now, with all the prices soaring. People cannot even buy bread. The price of bread is 30% higher than it was less than a year ago. The economic situation is beyond horrific, and we all know how it's all started. It was because of the scheme that was put in place by the Lebanese warlords since 1992, and it was brought upon heavily by the elite who are governing Lebanon by making the banking system in Lebanon the major economic foundation, if you will, of this nation, without having any industrial or agricultural industries that we can fall on in order to save ourselves. We are a consumerism nation. We don't have our own products. We don't have production. We consume more than 90% of what we use on a daily basis. So that being said, what happened is a big theft. It's the biggest scheme in history. It even surpasses the Ponzi scheme. What happened is the banks, alongside the Lebanese central bank and the political elite in Lebanon, literally stole the money of the people. How did they do that? People went to the bank, they put their money in the bank, they put their pension in the bank. The banks took those money, gave them to the central bank in order to get very, very high interest rates. What did the central bank do? They gave it as loans to the government, and voila, it vanished. And they gave also loans to people who are the 1% ruling the country. Within 1 year, from October 2019 up until today, more than $5 billion have been taken out of Lebanon in form of theft by the 1%, by the elite. This money is the money of the people. Hence, no more dollars in their bank accounts. Their bank accounts are just numbers. This is how it started. After that came the coronavirus. After that, the horrific experience that we went through, the Beirut blast on August 4, which completely shattered what was left of the capital. It completely destroyed residential areas 5 miles around ground zero. It now hundreds of thousands of people have lost their jobs. More than 300,000 lost their homes. We have people under the rubble. Up until now, more than 140 martyrs. Victims, I'd like to call them victims, because a martyr is someone who gives his life for his country. These are people whose life was stolen by the political elite in Lebanon. We have more than 5,000 people injured and scores still under the rubble.
And Leif, there's also the issue of U.S. economic sanctions affecting Lebanon that has obviously, has basically poured fuel on this fire of the currency deflating. A lot of people won't realize this, even those who are listening to this podcast, that Lebanon has actually been the target of American sanctions for many years. Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah has described them as an economic war precisely designed to starve both Lebanon and Syria. Laith, can you tell us about these economic sanctions and how they have actually also hurt the country?
So Lebanon has only 2 land borders. One is with Syria and one is with the apartheid state. So obviously there's no trade with the enemy. And since the beginning of the war on Syria, the only output for Lebanese exports, mainly for both the Syrian market and the Gulf market, ended. There was no more ability for Lebanese caravans of trucks to cross from Syria to the rest of the Arab world. So a huge market disappeared with the war on Syria. And so it's been now, 8 years now of that war. The port of Beirut became really the only exit for products of Lebanon, which meant that the Lebanese agricultural or small, products that were produced here, the few that couldn't anymore compete with the pricing of products coming from other Arab countries to the Gulf countries' consumption market. So obviously the sanctions destroyed what was there, the very small industrial and agricultural base of Lebanon, with also the end of the tourism industry that we saw also during that same period. and eventually the financial industry, which was kind of the crown and the jewel of Lebanon's finances. Gulf rich people coming and depositing their money in Lebanese banks. That ended with all the pressure coming in from the different Gulf countries that were upset at Hezbollah and Lebanon standing by the Syrian government in its war against the Wahhabi Contras. So the final straw that broke the camel's back was the Caesar's Act that was implemented by the Congress in the United States, which made it practically impossible to do any trade, the little of trade that was left with Syria. And this is all before we even discuss the tragic explosion in the port of Beirut. And I just want to point to one thing before we move on to other issues, is that the government of Lebanon just resigned like less than half an hour ago. The Prime Minister Diab came on television and addressed the nation, declared the resignation of the government, and he pointed to how all those who have been in power in the country for so long before he was appointed as Prime Minister at the end of 2019 were responsible for all the problems that we face today, and that the corruption is not only in the government as he thought, but had infiltrated every part of the establishment and society, which made it impossible for them to do their job. And maybe definitely we need to discuss what happened in the port and in light of the various governments that had power over the decisions that were made to end up with that supposedly 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate in Pier 12.
And I want to talk about the resignation of the government today. Recently, Professor Rania Masri of the Lebanese American University recently said that this catastrophe was neither a natural disaster, nor an accident, nor an external act of terror. This explosion was caused by the criminal negligence of men encouraged by a political system designed to build clients and not see citizens. They were also quite aware of the bankruptcy, particularly since they are responsible for it. Now, I know both of you have been talking a lot about this corrupt government. Do you think that this is an accurate assessment about how the mass Lebanese people feel? What is your assessment of how Lebanese people feel? Where are they really placing their blame? And I'd like to start with Marwa, and then maybe Laith, you can answer that question.
I think, Manar, we all know, every resident, whether Lebanese or not, on Lebanese land, we already know who are the corrupt elite in Lebanon. The same people who have been in the same positions since 1992. The speaker, the president, the prime minister, they have been the same people. Maybe we have seen changing faces in both the presidency and the prime ministry office, but it's the same man in the speaking position. And as you know, Lebanon is a sectarian country, so everything is given positions according to their sect. So this is also something that's very drastic in the corruption and nepotism cases. We already know that these political blocs that were warlords since 1973 up until the Ta'if Accord in the early 90s, up until the 2005 disaster that happened in Lebanon with the assassination of the then Prime Minister Rafiq al-Hariri, and then the war upon war that came upon us from the Israeli entity. All of this have been mixed all together to bring the kind of system that's ruling now Lebanon.
Right, right.
If you think about it much, we could know that the people who own the banks are the same people who are politicians. You cannot be a politician or a member of the parliament if you have no connections to the banks. This is how much the banks are effective in Lebanon. The banks in Lebanon are owned by very, very powerful people who also are very good friends with the West, especially the West. I mean, the United States of America, that keeps imposing direct and indirect sanctions against Lebanon. All of this has come in one package, and at the same time, we have a very vile enemy to our south, and that's the Israeli entity that keeps taking advantage of every weakness that we have in our government or in our institutions. But at the same time, we have a very, very strong resistance, which liberated the land, which also rid us from terrorism, which has become a very a big threat for the American foreign policy in the region and for the Israeli entity as well. All of this is very complicated. We already know who our internal enemies are and external enemies are. But at the same time, we cannot just protest for the sake of protesting, because we know that the regime change plans coming from the United States of America will have an effect on our land. We don't want to see another Libya. We don't want to see another Syria. We have learned our lesson. But again, we cannot take the corruption anymore. We could 2,750 tons of ammonium. Could you just imagine if it was just 500 tons more? What could have happened? Could you imagine the number of people who have been killed? It's all because of corruption. Who ordered for this shipment to be docked in Beirut? Who ordered for this shipment to be stored in Port 12 in Beirut? Who ordered for the court not to talk about this? Who are the judges that decided to put this case in the drawers? And at the same time, what if this was actually an advantage taken by our enemy to be used against us? The corruption of our elite, what might have been used by our enemy against us. These are all theories that can be proven, but after the investigation has taken place. Every Lebanese, whether they are pro-resistance or anti-resistance, know who their enemy is. But with the presence of external factors in Lebanon, the resistance is being put at the very front of every corruption case, despite the fact that everybody knows that Hezbollah has no one inside the government. They don't have employees. They have nothing to do with the port. Their influence is outside the district of central Beirut. They have nothing to do with any kind of employment inside the Lebanese ministries from 1992 up until now. This is what we've been angry with, the internal politics of Hezbollah, because they despise they don't want to get involved in these politics. We push them to get involved and they refuse. At the same time, we have their very good allies who are part of the corrupt system in Lebanon.
Right, and obviously the first, one of the first tweets that came out to accuse Hezbollah was Human Rights Watch director Kenneth Roth, who basically laid
I'm so surprised.
He basically laid blame within just a couple of hours of the tragic blast, and basically that from the outside that definitely looked like exploitation, and now we're seeing people exploit an exploitation of a very tragic situation and laying blame at a group like Hezbollah, who's a resistance group.
So obviously,
Go ahead.
Kenneth Roth is an ex-CIA agent. We understand how the human rights, industry in the West works in tandem with Western imperialist objectives. That's not something to really delve into, because it's very obvious. But the thing that I disagree with Rania Masri, who is a friend of mine that I've known for decades prior to this, is the maximalist position. And, we know that the resistance of Hezbollah have been able to expel the Israeli occupation in the year 2000. We know that they took the political decision not to purge those who were collaborationists with the occupation and with the imperial order, because purging them entails a bloodbath. Purging them means targeting the Hariris, targeting the Phalange, targeting the Ja'jaz, targeting the Jumayyads, and that means a bloodbath in the streets of Lebanon. So in 2000, the resistance decided that it's not going to take that position, and it's going to, focus exclusively on making sure that its ability to resist Israeli occupation and a fight for the liberation of Palestine is paramount. And as long as that is not touched, it will not enter into an internal battle that requires that bloodbath. And, within 5 years of that, clearly Hariri, the father, Rafiq Hariri, the prime minister at the time, was pressured by the Saudis and the Israelis in the West to target the resistance, and he probably refused because he also didn't want a bloodbath, and therefore he was assassinated. And so in 2005, the assassination happened of Hariri, the father, and which we will be supposedly hearing the decision of the International Tribunal on his assassination in the next 7 days.
Which most probably will
that
say
was actually
Hezbollah.
scheduled. Sorry?
Which was most probably will say it was Hezbollah.
Yes, and it was supposedly scheduled originally for last Friday. So we know that within days of the assassination of Rafiq Hariri, the target was the Syrian army, and it was blamed and with Hezbollah, and the Syrian army withdrew from Lebanon, which opened the door for apartheid Israel to attack Lebanon in 2006, specifically to destroy the power of Hezbollah. And Hezbollah showed that it's able to defeat the Israelis in 2006 and set a new formula of engagement. And from that point on, and I think this is where we have to differentiate between what probably most people on the streets in Lebanon are feeling, which they have their anger towards all the elite of the country. But we also have to think about what is Hezbollah thinking through this? How did Hezbollah get to the position where it is at today? So it decided to take the slow path of finding, allies within the population of Lebanon that can become its, supporters or in tandem with it, take the government away from the forces that are loyal to the imperial forces, like the Saudis and others. And they found their match with President Aoun of the Free Patriotic Party, a Christian Lebanese who's on the one hand anti-Syrian, but is also sovereigntist, that thinks of Lebanon should be a sovereign country that protects itself against Israel. And that alliance came to fruition with bringing Michel Aoun to the presidency around 3 years ago right now, or 2.5 years ago, and an election that led to a majority controlled by the Free Patriotic Party, Hezbollah's political party, which is called Fidelity to Resistance, and the Amal Bloc. And for the first time, they, since 2000, since the liberation of Lebanon, Hezbollah had control of 2 of the 3 heads of government. The president, and I don't mean control, but had like an alliance with, or the people that they can depend on. The Speaker of the House, who's from the Amal Party, and then they made a deal with Hariri to come into as a prime minister. And if you remember, the Saudi government called him to Riyadh at the time after he accepted the prime minister position, tied him to a chair and slapped him silly and made him resign on air from Riyadh. And at that time, Hezbollah and the President Aoun refused the resignation and demanded for his return. France came in on the line and demanded for his return, and he came back safely. He wasn't chopped up like Khashoggi in the embassy of Saudi Arabia and Turkey, and he came back safely. And within like a few months, there was the demonstrations that forced his resignation. And finally, with the new government that came in end of November, beginning of December, of Diab, the Prime Minister Diab, this is the first ever independent Sunni that is outside the future party Hariri bloc to be appointed as Prime Minister. The guy has been only in power for 6 months. That in that brief moment of 6 months, Hezbollah and the sovereigntist bloc in Lebanon had control of the three presidencies, the president, the prime minister, and the speaker of the house. They only needed to clean up the army and the judiciary, which are infiltrated by agents of the West, to be able to actually get down to arresting those who were responsible for all the theft in the country. And then we had this explosion, and here we go, a resignation of the government, and we're back to square one.
And obviously, with this resignation, prior to this resignation, there have been, these demonstrations that have been taking place on the streets of Lebanon. And it's pretty incredible to just watch, it's like clockwork, there's a tragedy, right? Then there's demonstrations, and then we have Western media and Western pundits, putting their support behind these protesters and saying, we believe and support in their self-determination. Marwa, I would like to ask you, what do you think of these demonstrations? And is the media accurately, painting an accurate picture of what their true issues are?
Of course not. But August 4, absolute disaster in the city.
Right.
August 5, 6, 7, you see riots destroying what's left of Beirut. What the hell is going on? Excuse my French. What is going on?
Right.
What is going on? How would you continue to destroy your city by saying that this is a form of protest? We still have people missing under the rubble. Just wait till we get them out. You can protest as much as you want, but not this way. It's not just about the protest and the violence. It's not just about killing a police officer that has nothing to do with this. This police officer might have died in the explosion. This is a Lebanese citizen. They pushed him into an empty elevator. They killed him. Add to that, they went into the ministries, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Economy. They started destroying documents that would actually incriminate all those who have been in power, the corrupt elite that is backed by the United States of America. And when I say backed the United States by the United States of America, I mean it literally, because when the real protests started and people were targeting the elite who were behind the theft of their money, namely the head of the central bank, Riyad Saleh, the first person who came out to defend him was the American ambassador at that time, and then a new ambassador came along whose name is Dorothy Shia, and she says literally that he's a red line and he has the support of the international community and the support of the United States of America. Who cares if you support him? He's the man who helped steal my money. Right. Why would you not allow me to hold him accountable? Add to that, protests in the streets against whom exactly? Shouldn't these protests be against the employees that allowed this to happen? This disaster to happen? Shouldn't they be against the ministers, the 4 ministers who came consecutively from 2013 up until today, who knew that we had large amounts of ammonium nitrate in our port and said nothing about it, said absolutely nothing about it? And Beirut is so small and everything is packed together. It's a residential area. It is just catastrophic. You cannot just begin to explain it or describe it. You have to see it with your own eyes. It is catastrophic. 6 years, they did nothing about this. Aren't these protesters supposedly against this corruption? Then why are they targeting the parliament? Why are they targeting what's left of Beirut, destroying what's left of the people's properties, despite the fact that I don't like the new Beirut that was built by Rafi al-Hariri? I want the old Beirut, which was also stolen by the Beirutis, and where the Beirutis were kicked out in the 90s away from Beirut with a very big scheme by Rafi al-Hariri. But that's not our case right now. What we should be doing is, first and foremost, trying to relieve the city of Beirut and not destroy it. That's number one. Number two, not destroy the documents that will be great evidence in our hands, in the hands of the people, against this elite that they are supposedly writing against. And I should mention something very important. When the conference that was held on Sunday was headed by Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, and they said that they are trying to fundraise and relieve Beirut and Lebanon in general. He specifically said that all the funds to be raised will be given to NGOs in Lebanon, to the civil society. This is what he said, the civil society in Lebanon. What does he mean by that? This is basically why Hassan Diab resigned today. It's not because of the protests. This is ridiculous if you say that a couple of hundred people made this government resign. Absolutely not, because Hassan Diab touched by his own self that the treachery of the international community and how they stand with this political elite, this regime in Lebanon, and how they want this regime to continue working because it is very much benefiting the West by the work that they're doing. Macron said that two very important points that he spoke about. One, the money will not go to the Lebanese government. Why? Because the Lebanese government at that time was run by Hassan Diab, and they knew that corruption will not be included in that government. Two, he said that we will be speaking with the United Nations to increase their influence in Lebanon. What is he speaking about? Who is actually representing the UN in Lebanon? It's the UNIFIL. Who are the UNIFIL? It's the forces that are supposedly the peacekeeping forces, quote unquote, in South Lebanon, that supposedly are there to stop any sort of aggression that comes from the Israeli side or any sort of retaliation that goes from Lebanon. But they have recently been being very violent with our people, with my people in South. Last week, they shot a farmer in South Lebanon. What does Macron mean by saying that they want to increase the influence of the UN in Lebanon? They mean that they want to make more to add to the tasks of the UNIFIL in South Lebanon, but this will be absolutely disaster, I tell you. What's coming next is absolutely unknown, but if the elite in Lebanon, and especially the US-backed elite, and especially the Phalanges and the Jaja Lebanese Forces Party, who today claim that they are the cleanest party in Lebanon, that I laughed, to be honest with you. I laughed very loudly also. The man literally killed more than 4,000 Palestinians in the massacre that he did in Sabra and Shatila. More than 5,000 missing Lebanese, Syrians, and Palestinians because of this criminal. He says that they are clean people. Excuse me. If this is what regime change looks like in Lebanon for the US-backed forces in Lebanon, then by God, we will be seeing a catastrophe in this country. But what they don't understand is that according to the latest elections that happened in 2008, the parliamentary elections, the majority went to the Resistance Alliance, Free Patriotic Movement, Hezbollah, Amal, Marada, a lot of Druze as well, and so Christians, Druze, even Sunnis as well, who are allied with Hezbollah for the first time in Beqa. There was also a Sunni candidate who won, which is part of the Hezbollah alliance in Lebanon, which means that the people in Lebanon, the majority of the people in Lebanon, are with the choice of the resistance. So any kind of forced regime change that benefits the West and does not really clean the corruption at the top level of management in the Lebanese government will most definitely end in a bloodbath in the streets of Beirut.
Absolutely. And I think that, by now, I hope that most people would know that taking any sort of aid, an aid that would go directly to these, Western-backed pro-democracy NGOs would be a total disaster and would actually only, increase the corruption in the country and enable and empower that 1% that you described. I mean, recently, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, he claimed he had a steadfast commitment to assist the Lebanese people. And obviously we should we should definitely take that with a grain of salt. And so there have, you both talked a lot about the resistance, which is obviously Hezbollah resisting Israeli expansionism and occupation and colonialism, and also Western imperialism in the region. There have been some pretty heightened tensions with Israel currently. In Laith, I would like to ask you this question. Last month, the IDF killed a Hezbollah fighter, and while the Israeli government has offered to help Lebanon, a former member of the Israeli parliament described the blast as a gift from God. What is the current situation between Lebanon and Israel, and then also with Hezbollah, and how do you see their relations playing out in the near future, considering what has recently taken place?
So I just want to point out that Moshe Feiglin is not a regular member of Knesset, the Israeli apartheid parliament. He was the deputy speaker of the Knesset, and he was in the coalition government of Netanyahu previously. And also, what I would like to point out is he didn't only, rejoice for the explosion. He actually said, "Thank God," and those who planted, who planned and executed this, gift. So, and he said it's a blessing for the what do you call it? The celebration of love. It's a Jewish holiday that I can't recall its Hebrew name right now. So this is more important than the fact that he rejoiced for the explosion, is the fact that he thanked those who planned and executed it, which is a tacit admission that there was something to do with Israel in this explosion, some external contribution. And in terms of the heightened tensions between apartheid Israel and Hezbollah in the 2 weeks prior to this explosion, there was an assassination of a Hezbollah member in an attack outside Damascus, Syria, where apartheid Israel attacked Syria one night, and one of the targets they hit in outside the airport of Damascus, a caterer of Hezbollah died and was martyred there. And Israel at the time sent the letters through the United Nations to Hezbollah, practically apologizing, claiming that they didn't know that there was a Hezbollah caterer in this location. And because Hezbollah has already set the formula of engagement between the two parties, which is a tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye, everybody was expecting that Hezbollah will retaliate in a measured response, meaning they probably would have liquidated some apartheid goon on the border somehow. And the whole of the Israeli apartheid army withdrew from the border from all the posts that are visible on the Lebanese side from site-wise, so they wouldn't be targets. They set the whole north of Palestine under high alert. And at one point, some of your listeners may remember, they attacked in 2 different locations 2 days in a row. And what became a big joke, everybody was talking about how apartheid Israel was attacking ghosts of Hezbollah, or the jinn of Hezbollah, the genies.
I remember.
And so the whole of the Israeli media and the whole of the local media here in the Arabic world were making fun of the whole security establishment in apartheid Israel, and which begs the question, were they fed up? Were they not able to hold their anger back? Were they humiliated with this policy of standing on one foot and waiting for their punishment, as Nasrallah called it? And did they decide that they'd rather bring Lebanon to its knees than wait another day for their punishment? And I think this, us opening up right now the discussion about the explosion, we need to actually discuss the details of this shipment, because there's a lot of questions that we don't have answers to, but there's a lot of questions about what brought this amount of ammonium nitrate to the port of Beirut, and how could it stay there for so long? And I think we should be discussing that.
And Marwa, when we see these protests, you mentioned that they were about 200 or so people protesting, and you don't believe this is the reason why the government has
course it's not. Of
resigned.
course it's not.
But my question is, based on some of the questions that Laith raised and some of the points that you have raised, do you see the Lebanese people, despite their differences, despite this very brazen attempt to divide the people, do you see the Lebanese people uniting amid this crisis? Or do you see the elite and Western powers and apartheid Israel winning in dividing the people even further? Marwa.
We have never been united, Manar. We've always been, look, there was a Ta'if Accord in the early 90s that stopped the bloodshed in Beirut and the extremities, but the war never ended. Those who were warlords at the time just became business partners, but the people never forgot.
Right.
Everyone has people whom they lost, a loving member, etc. But at the same time, we had Israel bombing certain areas in Beirut, killing certain people in Lebanon, especially in South Lebanon. We had the occupation, then we had the liberation, then we had the 2006 war, then we had several kinds of assassinations happening against especially against the resistance. But at the same time, when this happened right now, the first day was a shock for everyone. I'm talking about the explosion. When this explosion happened, the first day, it was a disaster. It was everyone was just shocked, despite the fact that this disaster affected everyone, both in Beirut, that is a majority of anti-resistance people, and a majority of pro-resistance people, because Beirut is not for just one people. Right. There are streets that were destroyed in Beirut that all of them are pro-resistance, but we did not see any of them on the news, whether in Lebanon or outside Lebanon. At the same time, today we are hearing sectarian words even more than we have heard after the protests in 17th of October that started when they started accusing Hezbollah of having corrupt allies. Today, we are hearing sectarian divide more than ever. It's like we're back to 2005. This is how thin the ice is in Beirut right now. Anything could start a fight, anything. Yesterday, there was actually some sort of an incident in the outskirts of Beirut where a few men in a Sunni majority area attacked a couple of men who are supposedly Shia. Mm-hmm. It was terrible. Can you imagine if this sight is seen all across Lebanon tomorrow because of certain sectarian insights that are definitely having the blessings of the US and Israel? We are at so far away from any kind of unification right now, especially after the resignation of what was supposedly some sort of a hope of a government in Lebanon. Now, the people will just become even more sectarian, especially that the upcoming days will prove that the governing elite will go towards what's known as a unified government, or a government of unity, which means a government that has all the political elite, specifically including those who are supported by the US. But my anticipation, what I think will happen, is those who are now influenced by the foreign policy of the US and affected and supported by Western countries will not accept to have Hezbollah in the government.
Yes.
I tell you, they will not accept to keep this parliament. They will ask for a new parliament, but they will not accept a new electoral law, which means that we will go into a very long deadlock of political stalemate. We will go into a very long time of people saying, we want this, no, we want that, until something major happens. And this is what scares me. This major thing is either a war with the Israeli entity or a direct war like the one that we saw against Syria.
Absolutely. And that's the tragedy in all of this, is because all of this sectarianism and civil strife is brought on to these countries in the Middle East by these colonial and imperial powers like Israel and the United States. That's what they'd love to have, is for the people to continue fighting amongst themselves, while Western nations and apartheid states can exploit, expand, and continue to colonize these lands and these people and their resources and their economic livelihood. Laith, speaking of, I'd like to ask you this. Lebanon's economy is in such dire straits that even the notorious predatory International Monetary Fund is hesitant to lend to it. With the blast causing an estimated $5 billion worth of damage, is there any coming back from this?
Well, there was a shift to the east by the government in Lebanon before it's resigned right now. That was in the process. It was clear that the West is not going to aid Lebanon in any way as long as there is resistance and Hezbollah, and there's no surrender to Israel and giving it all the oil and gas in the Mediterranean. So that was prior to this explosion. I'm kind of hopeful, and I don't know if I'm a little bit naive here, but I'm kind of hopeful that, given the fact that Hezbollah and the alliance that it holds decided already last December to appoint an independent Sunni as a prime minister. That maybe now that didn't even work, that this person was not strong enough to actually withstand the hurricane that just happened, that they will appoint somebody who's 100% loyal to the resistance. They have the parliamentary majority. This means that they don't have to actually form a unitary government with the imperialist saboteurs that are there. Because if they do, it is actually a step even further back. And I don't think, given Hezbollah having long-term plans that are 10, 20, 50 years ahead, which makes them so special. This is why they are a target, because they're able to plan as our enemy plans in long term, not only reactionary 1-year plans or so forth, that they will do that. Because, in the next week, when the decision comes from this international tribunal on the assassination of Rafiq Hariri, if they don't have a government that can stand for the truth, a prime minister and a president and a speaker of the house that can defend the resistance when the lie comes and blames Hezbollah for it. We are at a situation where, the West may want to bring in the United Nations, control over the country. And that means a direct confrontation. And I believe that Hezbollah is smarter than putting themselves in that situation. But in terms of this shipment that exploded in the port, the biggest questions that arise right now is that there's multiple stories about its origin, its destination, why it ended up in the port. But we know specifically that this shipment came from on a Moldovan flagged ship, the MV Rosis, and it came out of the port of Batumi in Georgia, which is a port on the Black Sea that is under the control of the anti-Russia government. And it was supposedly heading to Beira, Mozambique, to be delivered to the Mozambique Munition Company, who the spokesperson of this company was interviewed by CNN yesterday and said specifically that in the decades of the existence of their company, they've never lost a shipment. That this is the only shipment that was ever lost in their history, and that their company uses this for mining in Mozambique. We know also that there's two different stories about how the ship ended up in the port of Beirut. One story claims that there was 2 tractors on the ship that they were supposed to be delivered to Beirut, and the other claims that the ship faced some technical problems in the middle of the sea and decided to go to the port of Beirut, although it was in Turkish waters, which means it was closer to Cyprus when it had its problems. So it ended up in Beirut, and immediately the ship was, and the shipment was abandoned by its owners once it's reached the port of Beirut. And the sailors on the ship were stuck on the ship for over a year before they were finally allowed by the Lebanese authority under humanitarian law to leave the country and the ship when it was abandoned. And that's when the shipment was dismounted from on the ship, these 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate, specifically a version of the ammonium nitrate that is very highly induced at 34.7%, made for explosives, not for fertilizer. And that the ship sank in the port 3 years later. And so from that point on, there is a lot of record of the exchange between the port authorities, lawyers, and the courts in Lebanon that included an authorization by the courts for the destruction and or the sale of the abandoned material. And it still sat there after it was authorized to be either destroyed and or sold. And finally, on the day of, we have multiple stories of what triggered the fire. So we have one story that talks about fireworks in the warehouse,
Yes.
and another story talking about welding of the door in the warehouse. And we know from pictures that were circulated online of this welding is that there was a 5 meter by 5 meter breach in the warehouse, which can bring in a forklift to take things. And so the authorities were also refused under the order of court before when this breach was discovered, refused to do a count on the materials. So we have multiple stories of how much actually was of those 750 tons of ammonium nitrate was actually left. So a big indication tells us that this arrived in 2014, most probably was on purpose brought to Beirut with the excuse of a problem on the ship. Most probably was going to go to...
That was really very interesting for me in this story, especially the CNN story, is that the owners of the nitrates, the people who ordered the nitrates, said that they never paid for this shipment because they never received it, which means this takes us to the question in Georgia of the people who actually sold these nitrates. Why did they never send another ship back to get their products, which are worth millions of dollars?
Yeah.
Yes, and add to that, I would say that, so we had reports in Al Akhbar newspaper saying that most probably there was only 800 tons left, that of this 2,750 tons.
Which means they were stolen.
Means,
thank God they were stolen.
Yes, so some of them either made it to the Wahhabi Contras, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, at the time at the borders of Lebanon and Syria and or inside Syria, and or were sold illegally to the illegal rock quarries across Lebanon by somebody who's corrupt in the port. But what was interesting to me is that there was an article in Wired magazine, these scientists that went over the chemistry and explosion science And they compared to, the only thing that is comparable to this explosion that happened in Beirut, which was a fertilizer explosion in 1921 in Oppau, Germany, in a fertilizer factory. And that explosion left a 120-meter diameter crater. The claim is that in that explosion in Germany, there was 4,100 tons of ammonium nitrate, while the crater in Germany, it was in clay. The factory is built beside a forest and so forth, so it wasn't like solid ground.
Yeah.
Yes. So here in Beirut, the explosion left a 140-meter diameter crater, and the crater is on top of fortified cement, part of the pier in the port of Beirut, the pier number 12, that goes all the way down. So the size of the explosion, the scientists say that there was at least 4,000 tons of ammonium nitrate for it to make such a large crater in fortified cement. So there's a confusing situation here. Did some of this ammonium nitrate get smuggled and we were left with 800 tons? Or was there actually more than the 2,750 tons for it to have such a big explosion? And all these different conflicting facts that we are presented with leaves actually more questions than answers for us.
Well, and I think everything you just described is these are the questions that a lot of people have, and a lot of the points that you just made, the backstory and the context hasn't even been covered within mainstream media. Especially Western mainstream media, has been quick to lay blame and exploit the crisis to push their political agenda. But I really appreciate you explaining that to us, Laith, and I appreciate you, Marwa, for joining us today, and both for your analysis and your experience. Keep up the amazing work. That's a wrap for today's Mintcast podcast. You can find this podcast on our website at mintpressnews.com, and you can become a member on our Patreon page. We'll see you next week.